The evening had settled with a quiet that felt almost deliberate, as if the world itself had decided to pause and observe. She returned from work slowly, her coat brushing the back of her legs, the chill from outside still clinging to her, a subtle reminder that the day had ended but the world remained. Each step she took on the creaking floorboards of her apartment carried a weight of habitual familiarity, yet the echo of her own movements seemed louder, as if the empty rooms were listening. The air smelled faintly of the city outside, damp asphalt and distant exhaust, but inside, the apartment was warm, carrying the soft scent of old wood, a quiet comfort that had always reminded her of home. She set her bag down on the counter with deliberate care, letting her fingers linger over the rough leather, feeling the textures, the ridges worn smooth by daily use. Every small sensation seemed amplified tonight. The faint thrum of the refrigerator, the subtle hum of the heater, the distant sound of someone locking a car door on the street below. She moved toward the kitchen window, pausing to look out. The street was empty, washed in the soft, indifferent glow of the lamplight. Shadows stretched long, flickering gently as the wind shifted. The world outside was calm, unchanging, and she let herself believe that nothing unusual could intrude here. She made herself a cup of tea, the steam curling in slow, lazy spirals, carrying the bittersweet scent into the room. She breathed in slowly, feeling the warmth settle into her chest. There was comfort in routine, in the small, familiar gestures that shaped her evenings. Then came the first knock. Soft, hesitant. She froze, mid-breath, letting the sound linger in the air, repeating it in her mind. A normal knock, ordinary, polite, but somehow it carried an edge of uncertainty, a pause that made her notice the quietness around her in a way she hadn't before. Her heart rate didn't spike, not yet, but a flicker of awareness slid across her consciousness. She walked to the door slowly, letting each step sink into the carpeted floor, feeling the slight give beneath her feet, hearing the faint, muted echoes in the narrow hallway. Her hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment longer than necessary. She pressed her eye to the peephole. Nothing. The corridor was empty, sterile in the dim light, and yet the silence felt charged, almost waiting. She drew back, a small exhale escaping her lips, telling herself it was nothing. Perhaps someone had left and she hadn't heard them, a simple misjudgment of time or distance. Returning to the living room, she sank into the sofa. The warm cushions enveloped her, but the stillness of the apartment now felt heavier, a subtle pressure pressing lightly against her chest. Every familiar sound, tick of the clock, hum of the heater, occasional groan of the old building, seemed amplified, more deliberate. The shadows cast by the lamp stretched and recoiled subtly, as if they were aware of her presence. She sipped her tea, holding the cup longer than usual, feeling the porcelain warmth transfer to her fingers, grounding her, reminding her of the ordinary. She settled into a rhythm. Sip, breathe, glance at the window, listen. The knock came again, quieter this time, almost tentative, and she allowed herself a pause, letting the moment extend. It's just the neighbor, she thought. Or maybe no one at all. Her mind tried to rationalize, but a small part of her noticed the subtle shift in the air, the almost imperceptible change in the quality of the silence. And so the evening continued, slow and deliberate, each small gesture heavy with intent. The ordinary noises of the apartment, normally comforting, now seemed layered with meaning, or at least with the potential for it. She could feel herself noticing everything, every tiny detail. The slight chill from the open window vent, the faint vibration of the heater against the wall, the uneven shadow along the doorframe. Ordinary things, yes, but tonight each felt observed. The knock had become more than sound. It had become a presence, lingering in her mind, waiting in the quiet corners of the apartment. And though she did not yet move toward the door again, the weight of its absence, or of its presence, had already begun to press against her awareness. She settled back into the sofa, but her thoughts refused to stay calm. Was it really nothing? She asked herself, more than once, letting the question echo in the silent room. Or had I already missed something? The apartment felt different now. Not in any tangible way. The walls were the same, the furniture hadn't moved, but the stillness had deepened. She could feel it pressing in from all sides, a quiet weight that made her chest tighten ever so slightly. She went to the window again, her hand lingering on the cool glass, tracing small patterns with her fingertip. The street below remained empty, yet somehow it looked off. The shadows didn't move naturally. They stretched and shifted, lingering in ways that suggested a pause, as if waiting. She sat back down, pulling her knees to her chest. Her tea had gone cold, but she didn't notice. Her mind was replaying the knock over and over, dissecting it in every possible way. The hesitation in the sound, the timing. Had it been one knock or two? Could it have been coming from inside the apartment? Her rational mind told her it was impossible, yet the small voice of doubt whispered constantly, "Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe it's nothing." Then came the softest of all sounds, a faint scrape from the other side of the living room, near the hallway. She froze. Not just the usual pause of attention, but a deeper, instinctive halt, as if her body suddenly realized something important had shifted. The air seemed thicker here, heavier. Every inhale brought the scent of her tea mixed with something faintly metallic, almost imperceptible but undeniably there. She tilted her head, listening. The scrape came again, just for a fraction of a second longer, and then silence. Her heart picked up, but not dramatically. Just enough to remind her she was alone, or so she told herself. She rose slowly, letting the fabric of her sweater brush softly against her arms. Step by step, she approached the hallway, feeling the floorboards yield under her weight, each creak a careful punctuation in the silence. She reached the door to the spare bedroom, hesitated, and placed a hand lightly against the doorknob. Nothing. The knob was cold, the door locked. Locked, just as she had left it. She exhaled slowly, a sound she thought she could feel in her chest. Sitting down again, she tried to refocus on the mundane. She turned on the lamp beside her, letting the soft glow fill the room, chasing away the shadows, or so she hoped. She traced the patterns of light across the walls, watching them stretch and bend, trying to convince herself of the ordinary. But the strange feeling persisted. The apartment was too quiet, too deliberate. Each ordinary sound, fridge hum, distant street traffic, was sharper, more intrusive than usual. And then she heard it again. A knock, but lighter this time, almost hesitant, as if someone, or something, was unsure. She didn't move. Her mind raced, cataloging every possibility. The neighbor? Someone from another apartment? A prank? No, none of it felt right. There was a rhythm to the sound, a subtle irregularity that didn't fit any normal pattern. She sat frozen, heart quietly echoing, imagining the figure on the other side of the door. Her fingers gripped the edge of the sofa, nails pressing into the fabric. She tried to speak to herself aloud, soft, quiet words meant to comfort. It's nothing. Just the building settling. Just the wind. Just nothing. Her voice sounded strange in the emptiness, too loud in contrast with the stillness, like she had awakened some hidden echo. The knock repeated once more, then stopped. Silence. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time had become slippery, stretching and condensing unpredictably. She realized she had been listening, not watching the clock. She could feel the temperature change, subtle but definite, as if the room itself had grown colder, heavier. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to feel the warmth of her sweater, the grounding texture, but the sensation offered little comfort. Something had shifted. Something she couldn't see, touch, or name had entered the space around her. And in that weight, that silence that pressed on her from every side, she felt the first true sense of vulnerability. Not fear yet, not panic, just the undeniable, creeping awareness that things were no longer as they should be. The apartment, once a refuge, had become a stage, and the knock, the faint, hesitant, almost questioning knock, was the opening act. The night stretched on, long and quiet, but the silence was no longer comfortable. It had begun to feel deliberate, as if each moment was carefully measured, each second calculated to test her patience, her attention, her sense of reality. She sat on the edge of the sofa, feet tucked beneath her, listening to the house breathe. The hum of the refrigerator was louder now, the faint trickle of water through the pipes a whisper in the dark. Shadows pooled in corners, thickening as the lamp light struggled to reach them. The knock returned, softer this time, almost tentative. She froze, muscles tight, breath shallow, eyes scanning the hallway as if the motion of her gaze could somehow reveal what remained hidden. The sound didn't come again immediately, but she could feel it lingering in the air, a presence she couldn't see. Her mind, previously rational, began to loop through endless explanations. Maybe a delivery? Maybe a neighbor's mistake? Yet each theory felt wrong, inadequate, too simple. Hours, or perhaps an hour, passed in the dim light. She found herself noticing little things she hadn't before. The subtle shift in the carpet fibers near the front door, the way the doorframe's shadow seemed just slightly off, the way a picture on the wall tilted imperceptibly every time she glanced away. At first, she dismissed them. It was the house settling, her imagination, the play of light, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was moving carefully, deliberately, in the spaces just beyond perception. Her phone buzzed softly on the coffee table, startling her. She picked it up, scanning the screen, seeing only a reminder she had set earlier. But for a moment, the world felt suspended, every small sound and movement amplified. She put the phone down, the faint vibration echoing in her palm. Then she heard it again, the softest knock yet. 1, 2. She counted, held her breath. And in that instant she realized the rhythm was familiar, predictable, and terrifying. The first knock had been a warning. The subsequent ones, confirmations. There was a pattern, and she hadn't understood it until now. She pressed her palms against her thighs, closed her eyes, and tried to will herself calm, to tell herself she was imagining it. But the quiet voice of doubt had grown stronger, persistent, insistent. You are not alone. You have never been alone tonight. She rose, moving with exaggerated caution, feet sliding silently over the rug, ears straining for any hint of movement. Each step was deliberate, slow, measured. Her hand hovered over the doorframe as she approached the hallway. Every creak in the floorboards, every subtle shift of air made her stop, hold her breath, and listen. The lamp cast long, wavering shadows, each one resembling a figure just beyond recognition. She blinked, and they were gone, but the unease remained, pooled in the small of her back, pressing against her shoulders. She reached the door to the bedroom she had been avoiding, the one closest to the hallway where the knocks seemed to originate. Her fingers brushed the cold doorknob. It was locked, but the lock seemed less secure, almost symbolic. Something about the door called to her, not in sound, not in sight, but in some deep, inexplicable way that tugged at the edges of her awareness. Just open it. Just look inside. There's nothing to be afraid of. Her rational mind screamed to stop, to sit back down, to pretend none of this mattered. But her curiosity, tinged with a quiet, mounting fear, propelled her forward. Step by step, inch by inch, she felt the carpet fibers bend beneath her toes, smelled the faint scent of wax from the candles she hadn't lit, and noticed the way the air seemed heavier closer to the hallway. She touched the door. Her fingertips felt the grain of the wood, smooth yet imperceptibly cold. She pulled gently. Nothing. She leaned closer, listening, the silence echoing in her ears. And then, just faintly, she heard it again, a single, deliberate knock, coming from within the apartment itself, from a space that should have been empty. Her heart thumped, slow and steady, not racing but insistent. She wanted to convince herself of the ordinary. Pipes, wind, the house settling. But deep down, she knew better. She couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it, and that realization pressed down on her with quiet certainty. Something, or someone, was in the apartment. She backed away slowly, the shadows stretching along the walls like fingers. She felt the lamp's warmth on her skin, but it no longer reassured her. The apartment had changed. Time had shifted. Reality had narrowed into a single, unbroken thread of tension. And she was standing at the edge of it, aware that each breath, each movement, each heartbeat was measured, recorded, and somehow responded to. The first crack had deepened. It had widened. And she knew, instinctively, that the next step, whatever it might be, would demand a choice she might not be ready to make. She sank back into the sofa, knees drawn close to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as though the act alone could contain the unease swelling inside her. The apartment was quiet again, but that quiet felt different now, like the space itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to make a misstep. She rubbed her temples, trying to focus, trying to remind herself that nothing was out of place, nothing was wrong. The rational part of her mind repeated the same familiar phrases. It's the pipes, the wind, imagination. But the other part, the quieter, darker part, whispered differently. You heard it. You saw the shift. The pattern isn't imaginary. You are being watched. The voice was soft, almost imperceptible, but its insistence pressed against her skull like a slow, steady weight. She tried to dismiss it, tried to tell herself that she was tired, that the long day and the muted, empty apartment were making her see and hear things that weren't there. Her thoughts drifted back to the first knock, to the subtle vibration in the air, to the rhythm that had seemed deliberate, almost thoughtful. She pictured the hallway, the shadows pooling in the corners, the lamp casting fragile light across the walls, and she felt the tension tighten around her chest. Each small noise, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the faint whisper of air through a cracked window, was amplified, charged with possibility. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. A cold shiver ran down her spine, a prickle at the base of her neck, a tightening in her stomach. She tried to reason. Maybe she should call someone, a friend, a neighbor. But she knew in that deep, instinctual way, that explaining this would make her feel smaller, more exposed. And if she was wrong, if it was nothing, she would look foolish. Yet if she was right, hesitation might be dangerous. She pressed her palms into her eyes, breathing slowly, counting each exhale, attempting to ground herself. It's nothing. It's nothing. You're safe. The apartment seemed to lean in closer, walls stretching slightly, shadows folding over each other like thick, silent smoke. Every creak in the floorboards, every subtle shift of air felt purposeful, and she found herself staring at the hallway again, imagining something, or someone, standing just beyond her line of sight. Her mind created shapes in the darkness, tall, indistinct, yet somehow unnervingly deliberate. She couldn't tell if the shapes were real or the projections of her anxiety, and that uncertainty gnawed at her like a persistent itch she could not scratch. She tried to distract herself, reaching for the book on the coffee table, opening it, letting her eyes follow the words, but the letters seemed to blur and waver. Her attention kept returning to the door, to the hallway, to the impossible quiet that pressed in around her. She could almost hear her own heartbeat in the emptiness, slow, insistent, and yet somehow wrong. It was like the sound belonged to another person, another body, watching, waiting. Minutes, or was it hours? Passed in this tense, liminal space. She debated moving, checking the door, even looking into the hallway, but something restrained her. Rationality and fear collided, each demanding different actions. If it's nothing, checking the door will reveal the absurdity of your fear. If it's something, every step forward is a risk you cannot reverse. Her thoughts spun in a tight, endless circle, and she realized that the tension itself had become the point. The waiting, the uncertainty, the paralysis of choice. Finally, she stood, hands trembling slightly, not from exertion but from the accumulation of internal pressure. She walked slowly toward the kitchen, each step deliberate, each breath measured. The lamp's glow stretched across the walls in long, thin rectangles, flickering slightly with the motion of her passing. Her reflection in the window startled her for a moment, her own silhouette, tense and small against the night outside, but she caught herself, focusing on the sound, the space, the subtle cues that might indicate something amiss. And yet, the apartment remained stubbornly quiet, almost smug in its silence, as if it were aware of her deliberation and enjoyed the careful extraction of her resolve. Every instinct in her body screamed to check, to open the door, to verify reality. But fear, compounded with uncertainty, held her in place. She realized she had been reasoning for hours, chasing explanations that felt increasingly hollow, increasingly inadequate. Her rational mind whispered one final thing: do nothing. It's better to wait, better to observe. But beneath that whisper, deeper and older, something stirred, a realization that the apartment had already decided, that the choice she had yet to make might already be made for her. The weight of inevitability pressed down, and for the first time, she wondered if she had already crossed some invisible line, one she would never see until it was too late. She lingered at the threshold of the hallway, her hand hovering just above the doorknob. The quiet of the apartment seemed almost alive, filling every corner, pressing against her ears. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of traffic, the occasional creak of the building settling, but nothing else. And yet, the memory of the knocks, soft but deliberate, resonated in her mind like a pulse, rhythmic and persistent. She told herself she had to check, that it was rational, safe, responsible. But a part of her hesitated, weighed down by the dread that had been building over hours. She remembered the first knock, so easily dismissible, and the second, more insistent, that she had ignored. What would she find if she opened the door? Nothing? Or something she couldn't unsee? Her mind began to conjure explanations, each more plausible than the last. Maybe it was a neighbor returning a borrowed item, a lost pet seeking shelter, a friend attempting a prank. Each thought was an attempt to anchor herself in normalcy, to justify hesitation. And yet, she felt the quiet push against her, a subtle pressure that seemed to suggest movement was necessary, that action or inaction was now a choice she could no longer avoid. She glanced toward the living room, at the soft glow of the lamp, at the sofa where she had spent hours wrestling with her doubts. The apartment was familiar, almost comforting in its ordinariness. She could retreat, close the door, and pretend that nothing had happened. It would be easier, safer. Yet she knew, in some unspoken way, that retreat was itself a decision, carrying consequences she could not foresee. Finally, she exhaled, slow and deliberate, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down. She moved toward the door, each step measured, the sound of her own shoes whispering across the floor. She reached for the doorknob, fingers trembling slightly, and paused. The hall stretched out in front of her, dim and unyielding, shadows pooling where light could not reach. Her rational mind argued once more, whispering of caution, of patience, of observation. But the deeper, quieter voice, the one that had haunted her thoughts all evening, urged her to act, not to flee, not to hide, simply to open the door, to see, to respond. And so she turned the knob, slowly, deliberately, letting the mechanism click under her touch, feeling the subtle vibration beneath her palm. The door swung open with a creak that seemed louder than it should have been, echoing faintly down the hallway, mingling with the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The space beyond was empty, or appeared so. Shadows clung to the corners, indistinct and slow-moving, as if the room itself were breathing. She took a careful step forward, then another, feeling the smooth texture of the hallway carpet beneath her feet, the cool air brushing against her skin, the faint scent of the room settling into her senses. She looked around, scanning each corner, each doorway, each flicker of shadow, and saw nothing. The rational part of her exhaled in relief, the tension loosening just slightly, but the deeper unease lingered, like a shadow stretched thin across her chest. She told herself she had done the right thing, that she had faced her fear without incident, and turned back toward the apartment. And then she heard it, the softest shift, a subtle movement from behind her, just beyond the threshold she had stepped through. A sound almost imperceptible, but unmistakably deliberate, measured. Her body froze, a cold shiver climbing from her shoulders to her neck. She did not turn. She did not speak. She could only feel the presence, knowing in some deep, instinctual way that whatever it was, it had been waiting. She stepped back, hesitating, heart hammering against her ribs, eyes tracing the hallway one final time. And then the rational mind whispered again, quiet and almost pleading, "It's nothing. Just the apartment. You imagined it." But the small, insistent sense in her chest refused to relent. She had made her choice, the quiet act of opening the door, and now there was no turning back. The hallway remained silent for a long moment, but she felt the weight of observation pressing down. The choice had been made, simple and mundane, yet it carried a gravity she could not undo. The apartment held its breath with her, and she understood, in that quiet, unshakable way, that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. She closed the door behind her with deliberate care, the soft click echoing faintly in the empty apartment. The sound lingered, stretching into the silence like a faint tremor, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that nothing had changed, that the night would proceed as it always did, in its familiar rhythm of quiet hums, distant traffic, and the muted heartbeat of the apartment. But the stillness was deceptive. Every shadow now seemed heavier, every corner slightly darker. The air felt thicker, almost viscous, pressing against her skin with a subtle insistence. She could hear her own breathing, shallow, measured, each inhale a reminder of her solitary presence, each exhale a subtle acknowledgement that she had stepped beyond something she could not retract. She walked slowly toward the living room, her steps deliberate, feeling the carpet underfoot, cool and soft, the faint texture grounding her to reality. The lamp cast its steady glow, yet she noticed how the light now seemed hesitant, reaching only partially into the corners of the room. The walls felt closer, the apartment somehow smaller, and she could not shake the sense that she was no longer merely inhabiting the space, but being observed by it. Sitting down on the sofa, she tried to gather herself, to untangle the sensation of wrongness that clung to her. She reflected on the choice she had made, the simple act of opening the door. In that moment it had seemed ordinary, almost inconsequential. But now she understood. Choices, even the quiet, mundane ones, could ripple outward, altering the fabric of the familiar in ways imperceptible until too late. She stared at the lamp, its glow steady but faintly flickering in the periphery of her vision. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of the street, the soft settling of the building, all these sounds had returned, but they carried a weight, a subtle tension that was absent before. It was as if the apartment itself had absorbed her action and now responded in kind, patiently, silently, leaving her to wonder if anything in the world would ever feel normal again. Minutes stretched into an unmeasured time. She made no further moves, spoke no words, and allowed the silence to envelop her. It was not terrifying in a conventional sense. There were no screams, no sudden shadows, no sharp exclamations. It was something slower, more unyielding, an awareness that some threshold had been crossed, a quiet acknowledgement that the ordinary could fracture at the smallest touch. And then she noticed the faint sound again, softer this time, almost imperceptible. Not a knock, not a creak, not a whisper, but a presence, lingering just beyond conscious recognition. She did not move. She did not turn. She simply felt it, the subtle pressure at the edge of perception, and allowed herself to exist in that quiet knowing. Hours might have passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time itself seemed to hesitate. The apartment breathed with her, waited, and she understood that the choice, simple, mundane, irreversible, had left an indelible mark. Nothing else mattered. Nothing could change it. She closed her eyes briefly, the faint hums and subtle pressures settling around her, and let herself dissolve into the silence, aware that the night would stretch on, patient and endless, carrying with it the quiet consequence of a single, unremarkable decision. And somewhere in that quiet, the second knock never came again.